Hello and welcome to Making It Political. I'm Zach.
And I'm Gage.
This is a podcast by students for anyone interested in politics.
Yeah, just discussing general election nonsense,
Oh,
mostly.
yeah, exactly. So
Yeah,
let's start by talking about the debates.
the debates.
Uh,
Actually, the motion. What did you get as an impression actually from Rishi Sunak from the most? The final one since it was the last one the week before general election. Was it Wednesday maybe?
yeah. He sort of relies on shouting over people, doesn't he?
Um, yeah, I kind of like the system they have in America actually, with the whole. You have maybe have like 2 minutes to speak, and then you have your mic, the other person have the mic muted, so you can't interrupt. Because otherwise you get the whole situation of, and also like the distance that the stood how closely are stood together. I get the idea it's supposed to be confrontational, but that's all just done by the news
Mm.
companies, I reckon. Because in America they're a lot more separated, and you can't really interrupt everyone because they literally just switch your mic off. So
Yeah, yeah, I think it is better with the system they have when it's like one politician at a time being asked directly by the audience.
it's more informative. It does take away the banter of it, though, doesn't it? Really.
Well, I suppose, but it's supposed to be about us, learning about the policies. Like, because without that format, we wouldn't have had Keir Starmer actually explain that he had to choose between like tuition fees and the NHS.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. I don't know. I've kind of wondered how the news kind of has evolved around questioning politicians in the past 2 decades. If you look at Tony Blair on BBC News up until like what it is now, it's kind of crazy. Like the audience can go to say whatever they want to the politicians now. It's wild. Um,
Yeah.
I was fascinated by one question actually. Um, I think it might have been a woman, it might be Carol, maybe her name, something like that. I could be wrong. And she said,
Mm.
or he said, whoever it was, um, are you two really the best people we have on offer to lead this great nation? I don't know whether you agree with that question or not.
I, I suppose what are they supposed to say to that? To be fair, like, no, actually, I'm not.
Well, I think you're fine because I have no Sky TV. I'm perfectly suited. Yeah, no, that's fascinating. But I feel like the news headlines and all the tabloids have kind of. I feel like they've been quite harsh on Rishi. I feel like all these scandals are quite prevalent pretty much every general election because that news companies are literally digging for a scoop to get the newspaper sold, right?
There have been a
And
couple of scandals this time.
yeah, I know, but I feel like that might be because the media might have had their eye more close. I feel like leaving something early, it might have had maybe some influence, but like we're talking like the betting scandal is probably like nowhere near on the same level as something like the party the finance spending, whatever it was with Labour.
No.
Um, it's a small boathouse, um, and like the phone hacking, things like that, right? And
Oh, I
even
suppose people
Partygate,
are
right?
distracted.
Yeah, I feel
Mm.
like because the media's digging their hands into Rishi Sunak, I feel like even the most delusional and like ignorant like far right wing true conservatives have kind of seen the writing on the wall. We're talking like Rishi's putting up like a 1990 Margaret Thatcher end of the road kind of fight as though he can do it. But the difference being, I think Margaret Thatcher actually believed it her way of running the country, whereas Rishi's sort of, oh, I've got all the money, I've got family, I've gone to this university, blah blah blah. I've been to all over the world, and now he's just tick this off his bucket list. Led a country. How do you feel about
Mm. Um, I definitely feel the campaign has shifted from re-elect us to just don't give Labour a supermajority, which we've never had in our country anyway. So it's it's like sort of something they've made up. Well, I suppose it could happen, but it's something they've sort of made up to say this could happen if you all vote Labour. which has started splitting the vote because people think Labour's going to win. I'll vote Green, which is valid, but it splits the vote.
It is an interesting one, really, isn't it? The media coverage of general elections. It fascinates me every time. It never fails to do that.
Well, speaking of media coverage, Channel 4 Undercovering Reform. That was certainly interesting.
Yeah, no. Did you watch just the 1 minute clip that they shortened it down into, or did you watch the full 17 minutes? Was it?
I watched a 9 minute video.
It's quite damning. I think considering that the majority of their support is from far right, that are not going to change their views because they possibly even agree with this kind of extremist place. I mean, it's not just that with the Reform Party. Sorry, hang on. With the right wing, like kind of leaning into extremist viewpoints, you're not really going to change the opinion of those people because the media coverage saying Nigel Farage is a racist is kind of normal. It's not going to change his support because the majority of his support are diehard, really, aren't they? You know, and that's always going to be the case. There's no country on the planet without some form of far right, far left kind of extremist viewpoints. And that's how it's going to be. But I feel like they've also found other things, haven't they? Was it like one of them said that 13-year-old girls are more mature than 17-year-old girls? One supported the BNP, I think, and another said that Islam and Nazis are the same thing. You would have thought, imagine if Rishi or Keir Starmer as candidates had said something like that, they'd be wiped out, wouldn't they? Really, that's like death standards. That's why the Labour Party have been so ruthless. I mean, they've been on the defensive, sure, but they've been ruthlessly getting rid of candidates because they don't want any interference. But for Nigel, it doesn't matter what happens. He can just say, "Whoop, yeah, it's all a setup," and put your hands up, and it makes no difference to him because he's a fringe party, you know.
Yeah, he's definitely got the benefits of being a minor party, but also the benefits of having a quote unquote charismatic leader. I don't think he's charismatic, but it's interesting.
That's right, because I feel like a lot of people who aren't extremist or far right conservatives that are planning on voting for Nigel Farage are at the point where they're so fed up. Like, I was speaking to someone on the bus actually on the way back, about 55 and 56, something like that, maybe. A couple has definitely seen both Tony Blair's Labour and 14 years of Conservatives. And some of them are just so fed up with both that they're like, we want change. And if they're going to say they're making change and they're not changing anything at all, we're going to vote for someone else. And they've voted for reform. Now, they're not the extremist ones that are going to be diehard reform. And because of Nigel Farage's kind of charismatic way, he's sort of twisted the campaigning into a vote for reform is a vote for Nigel. And Nigel's very popular, whether he's reform or not. As a person, he's very popular. I can understand. I can see the appeal. Not for me. I can see the appeal in general. But the whole idea of a vote for reform is a vote for Nigel has really embedded itself with those kind of voters that aren't extremists. So the sort of like household owners that want change. They're not bothered what their candidate is like, whether they've been vetted properly, whether they've been BNP supporters, whatever it is. They don't care because all they see in their eyes is a vote for reform, no matter what the candidate is a vote for Nigel, and that just goes to show how much how important party leader can have on the party image and the support it gets, and maybe party leader is more influential than people think, because some people think it's just like the face of the party, because you've got boring prime ministers that have still won general elections, right? But at the end of the day, I think Nigel Farage represents how influential a charismatic leader can have on a party.
Well, I was up in Staveley today, on the campaign trail for Labour, because I'm a member, And we came across this woman, and she was saying that she was voting reform. And then we brought up the fact that one of the candidates had said something about putting people with guns on the beach, shooting the people coming on boats. And so we brought that up to her, and she said, "Well, it's a way to get rid of them, isn't it?" Which is just like
It's,
craziness.
I mean, putting like personal opinion aside, I think that's outrageous and wrong, frankly. But how old was this person?
I don't know. I'd say 40s, maybe.
Jeez, it's just,
Yeah,
isn't it? Some people that want change are really digging the appeal of like a different way of doing things, and I guess in a sort of messed up way, saying things like shooting illegal immigrants and Islam and Islam and Nazis are the same thing, and kind of these extremist viewpoints that people hold, even if like it's kind of subconscious um, bias, like things that they haven't noticed, um, and they just want change, and to them that appeals to them. I can understand sort of. I mean, this is how extremism really spreads, doesn't it? Um,
yeah,
being slowly coerced without realizing it towards something, whether you believe it's right or wrong or not. It's just how it works, right? It's like being brought up by your parents one way or another, you know? Um, like if you have an army background, you're not coerced into it. You're not actively choosing to do it. It's just you're surrounded with it, and you just eventually pick up on these kind of viewpoints and behaviors, and that influences it ultimately, really, isn't it? So I can really see the appeal as to why someone that wants change has seen 14 years of Tories, 13 years of Labour, and just wants out of that kind of loophole of backwards and forwards and no progress. So I can understand.
yeah. Well, we have a reform candidate in Chesterfield. I don't know. I don't remember his name, but at the hustings the other night, he was banging on about how we need to save the NHS and all that. But when you look at the manifesto and stuff like that, Nigel has said he wants to go for the more privatized system. He was saying something about the French system or something like that.
Oh yeah, so I think it involves the idea being if you have a waiting list that's beyond like a certain amount of time, they're going to offer you coupons, which I think
Mm.
considering how like right wing conservative Nigel is, that sort of like I feel like what he's aiming for is more of a progressive way of saying we're not going to get rid of the NHS. We're going, but he's like slowly shifting the attitude. It's like the same with extremist views again, like becoming an extremist. You're slowly making these small changes without us realizing it. Something like a coupon system. I mean, I don't know what he's going to do with that. I could be talking waffle. I feel like these small changes to things like the NHS and the army are ways of kind of getting about his political ideology into action over a long period of time. Like 5 years is a long time in people's lives. It takes. I mean, we're talking. You could get someone in a terrorist organization coerced into believing one thing within a year. This is 5 years of slowly changing things, and 5 years is a long time in politics. In a way, in its own way, it's also short in other ways. Um, but yeah, I feel like that's just what I feel. I feel like that's his way of progressively changing things to his own ideology.
Yeah. Well, technically he's not even conservative, is he? He's populist. But I think we should move on from reform because, as is the ruling class, we need to talk about the other parties. So you're in northeast Derbyshire, right? From what I saw on my brief visit today, it's very split between Labour and Lib Dem.
Um, I think considering where I am so considering I live in a rural area and probably one of the most like, more safe areas in northeast Derbyshire, really low crime rate, lots of old people, kind of lower middle class. Um, so we're not Rishi Sunak, but we're also not we're not struggling to make ends meet. I don't think. I wouldn't have to ask my parents. But I feel like in our area within North East Derbyshire, because the area I live in makes about 10% of the vote share of North East Derbyshire, but
Mm.
actually probably a bit less, maybe like 7%, if everyone voted here. And like I said, it's quite old. The homeowners are not struggling to make ends meet here. That should scream conservative, right? But then again, this is an area right next to Chesterfield and Sheffield and everything and all those places that have also seen what neoliberal policies of deregulation have done to the areas here. And I think at heart, this area could be Labour again this time next week. I don't doubt that that's possible. However, considering that North East Derbyshire is quite rural, you know, the rolling Derbyshire hills, things like that, the kind of environment is important to us, but not in the way of like voting Green Party important, as in something that ties us to this place is each other, what we've been through together. And I think the most important thing as an MP in this area is being local. And I think Louise something or other, whatever her name is, the Labour candidate, I believe she's not actually from North East Derbyshire. And I have, from where I am, I know that like MPs can put through, like standing candidates, sorry, can put through the mail, different amounts of mail in certain areas. So, for example, where I live is probably more conservative. So I feel like that might explain why I've got more kind of backing Lee Rowley, local Lee Rowley, back Lee Rowley. same thing in different forms. Every single every other day we're pretty much getting something back for Lee Rowley. But I also feel like that's probably within the whole region. I think the Conservative Party might have noticed that, considering that he's locally, there's a good chance of winning. Yeah, I just think within my region, I think Lee Rowley might just hold on. I don't think the Lib Dems will be in the argument. Um, I don't think that's going to work. I feel like this area is also very heavily against Lib Dem for the whole Nick Clegg tuition fees thing. I still think that still has deep roots in this region. But like I said, I feel like Lee Rowley, being a local Conservative, has a fairly decent shot at defeating the odds against him. But yeah, do that as you will.
Yeah, so I'd like to address the two of the points you made there. Firstly, about local MPs. I find that interesting. So I want to be an MP when I'm older. So I'd be a young politician. I sort of feel like I'd be at a bit of a disadvantage because here in Chesterfield we have Toby Perkins as MP. It's quite a safe Labour seat. So say I joined Labour Party and I want to be an MP. Well, we've got Toby Perkins here, so I'd sort of be forced to go somewhere I'm not familiar with, which sort of automatically puts me on the disadvantage for local or like whatever type of election maybe. And then the second point you came onto with Lib Dems, 2010 stuff still being raw. Ed Davies has been absolutely hounded on the debates about 2010, even though it's 14 years ago. Well, I get it. People are mad that the party broke their promises, but at the same time, he's not Nick Clegg, is he? But I do respect his policy of take the politics seriously, but don't take yourself seriously. Although I do think his messages are getting lost in his antics.
I'll start with the second point. The mistrust that Nick Clegg's actions had done for the Dems, whether like there's a political storm like we have right now, where nobody likes Labour, nobody likes Conservative, and the Lib Dems are most definitely going to increase vote share, maybe twice as many this time next week. I feel like that mistrust is going to be deep rooted for the next century. You've seen 14 years of Conservative lies and incompetence will probably buy Labour quite a few scandals and still see majority wins this time in a decade, really. Because people don't forget these things. The idea is we're kids, we don't see this, but we're trusting people to run our country, and if they go back on their promises, that's it. That's their job. That's the one thing they have to do is just stick to what they say and do what they've been voted in for, and that's the whole point of it, right? If you go back on those promises, you have lost the trust of the people, and whether it's Ed Davies' fault or not, because it isn't really, is it? He has to be challenged on that, and whether that's because people are not forgetting it or not, or maybe they're just trying to ensure that they can start trusting the Lib Dems again. That's why they do. That's why they're questioning him on it. They're there to check what have you done to change this Lib Dem party. What is stopping you from going back and doing what you did 14 years ago and screwing all of your voters over? But I feel like at least the Lib Dem party now will be more at risk because they're not going to make the same mistake again. I don't think. The only issue is they're not going to get the chance to rectify that mistake, have they? The kind of point of you had your shot and you blew it, So that to address your second point, I feel as though that mistrust is used as both a way of as like a check and balance on the Lib Dems, um, sort of just to reflect on the past as well, because 14 years isn't a long time in politics in terms of scandals. People aren't forgetting 14 years of Conservative incompetence anytime soon, especially since it was a benchmark of end nutrition fees. I mean, think of what Kennedy did prior to Nick Clegg and how he stood against tuition fees rising. So yeah, and then your first point about being an MP. I feel like as a young MP, it'd be quite difficult to win in this area, in Chesterfield or North East Derbyshire, quite frankly. What I would suggest if I was you is just to get the experience and also to rise up the ranks. Because if you're standing as an MP with no experience crucially, when you're working in those political environments, you're getting the contacts and the experience and the support that you would definitely need to get into an election. Like, what are the chances of being selected really for a party that's likely to win within an area that's not yours, and also the whim of you not having any experience? I feel as though your best shot really would be to get onto that career ladder, within the Labour Party if you feel as though that's the right step for you. I wouldn't go for a party like, imagine if the Conservatives were in Labour's position right now and it was a Chesterfield and Labour, it was a Conservative constituency, and you've got like you're thinking, Labour's going to win the next general election, but you go with the party that you believe in, because otherwise that will haunt you in the future times when you get questions and scrutinised and checks and balances against you, and you aren't there to match your personality and ideology with the party's ideology. So my advice: get on the ladder within the party that you believe in. If the Dems, then go with the Dems. At the end of the day, whether you're serving or not, it's still a career to be a politician, isn't it? Whether you're representing MP or just one that's challenging. Follow your heart and get on the career ladder, I think, within that party. See where you end up.
Well, exactly. I'm not thinking about it too much until after university, because I definitely want to do that first. But coming back to talking about the Lib Dems, with you saying they're not going to get a chance to rectify 2010's mistakes, there are some polls showing that Lib Dems may become the official opposition, which I think would be quite a nice change than just Labour and Conservative yelling at each other. I just think it'd be interesting to see where the scrutiny sort of is aimed at. But also, I think, regardless of whether it's a Lib Dem opposition or not, or whether it's reform like Nigel claims it's going to be, I feel like this election is sort of the first step towards a more multi-party system rather than a system dominated by Labour or Conservative. That's what I think. And then this is very tangential, but the Lib Dems certainly were huge in 2010 because I would have been 4 at the time. I remember people speaking about the Lib Dems. I don't remember any mentions of Labour and Conservative. I'm sure they were there, but I remember the Lib Dems, which is interesting. I feel like from when I was 4, which I don't remember, which I remember barely anything from.
Well, as to the point of Lib Dem opposition, I think you're absolutely right in in kind of the idea of the potential for them to be the official opposition, which I think would be a phenomenal change, whether I support that idea or not. I think for Britain, seeing something like this would be astronomical. We'd have never seen anything like it. And I also think it would bring out arguably the best and the worst within the Lib Dem, because as an opposition party, you're under just as much scrutiny as arguably the largest party. At the end of the day, they're going to be checked. You're going to be forced to write a proper manifesto. They can't have any kind of discrepancies in it, because that's going to be a lot more checked than, like, I know, for example, the Conservative one has been checked and the Labour ones have been checked with the finances. The Lib Dems are kind of been pushed aside with that. If they were an official opposition, that gives them a massive platform, like a positive multiplier effect. If they're the official opposition, they're getting more screen time, more short money for these seats. They're going to get more experts, think tanks, you name it, and then they're getting more votes, more screen time. It's going to be a cycle, and who knows? 20 years from now, we could see the legacy of Ed Davey at the helm, with whoever's standing as the leader of the Lib Dem party at the head of this country. So that's just one way of looking at it. And it definitely would be a change, I think. And what was your second point?
I was just mentioning how big a deal the Lib Dems were before.
Oh, yes. I feel like the Lib Dems are a big deal again this time around, being the party of wasn't me, hands in the air. Kind of, they've waited and waited, the Lib Dems, for their opportunity since their existence, really. And with what they had in 2010, they are going to be absolutely thorough in not making that mistake of what Nick Clegg did again. So yes, definitely a change. And for a multi-party system, if what you were mentioning about that, I don't know about multi-party system. I mean, from what I've heard in class, you're not the biggest fan of first post. Well, first past the post in this case is probably going to prevent any opportunity, I think personally, of a like proper multi-party system of what we would see like in Stormont or in Europe, like the Netherlands. And I think that's, whether you agree with what first past the post does or not, there's no denying that it is fairly consistent with producing majorities. And I think we're not going to see anything more than it's going to be a dominant part. It's going to be a dominant party, really, isn't it, at the end of the day? I mean, if people are talking about, if the Conservatives are talking about a Labour supermajority in the House of Commons after the general election, that immediately wipes out the idea of a multi-party system by itself, because they're so powerful that they are, they've got an elected dictatorship at that point, really, haven't they? But in terms of on a more kind of small, like zoomed in way of looking at it, if you're excluding the Labour Party, the opposition is kind of more multi-party, more similar size. We're not getting like Labour, Conservative, and then the largest third and fourth parties are like the Lib Dems, and then it gets like to the point of like 20 seats to 1 seat with the Greens. We are definitely going to see more of a ignore Labour, 60 to 100 Conservatives, 40 to 60 Lib Dem, if the SNP do well enough at retaining their seats, then we could also see them at the kind of 30-40 region, and that would produce kind of an image of what multi-party could be like on a smaller scale if you focus more in on it like the Labour Party being there. But overall, I would say in conclusion that this general election will not see the um, the kind of presence of a multi-party system at all. I think it will be the furthest from it we've ever seen, really. But yeah, that's my view on it.
No, I definitely agree. This is going to be a dominant party system this election. I'm not suggesting we're going to have coalitions in maybe the next few, but I do believe it's taking steps towards a more balanced spread of parties, especially with the current secondary school, like when the current secondary school generation are all old enough to vote. Because when you look at the sort of mock in-school general election we're having, I've been hearing a lot of support for my party, which is basically the Greens, and a lot of support for the Blue Party, which is basically the Lib Dems. So it'll be interesting to see when they've all turned 18 able to vote, how maybe Lib Dem Green voting percentage is changed. That's
It
my
is
take on that.
fascinating because when people turned 18 a decade ago and decades, people were a lot more politically involved, really, weren't they? Because politics was everything. And now it's not that big, nowhere near as big of a deal, really, especially since politics becoming increasingly complex. It's less of red v blue, red v blue this, red v blue that. It's now to the point where there's so many manifestos and different ways of scrutinising, newspaper this, BBC News that, and it's all massively overwhelming with social media as well. They don't know what to believe as well as that. It's become so complex in a nutshell that some people are just switching off completely. Not only is politics boring for them, it's too complex to understand. It seems overwhelming to them. I think that's an issue that needs to be addressed, really. I think that's something that not a lot of people mention. But as someone that's turning 18 in just a few months, I feel as though politics is becoming hugely overcomplicated because of how much coverage it's getting, but little viewership it's getting at the same time. So they're becoming less informed and less interested. You've got like rise of voter apathy, and I'm worried that either people are just going to not vote or they're just going to vote. They're going to be like Labour Conservative. That's the ones I heard the most about. I'm going to vote one of these, and those small parties are missing out on that. And I also think that there'll be, on the other hand, there'll also be some cases people that have seen the policies of the Green Party, the Lib Dem parties, like in our mock general election in school, that might transition into votes this time, the next general election. Maybe it won't. I can't say for sure. But we'll find out more. I think particularly fascinating this time next week when we have another discussion. I think we could go over actually the results of that mock general election and maybe like dig in deep as to the reasons for that. Because we also had to campaign for it as well, so we could talk about that. But yeah, I understand what you mean. I think, and yeah, I feel as though that won't transition to Lib Dem and Green support rise in the future, unfortunately. But that's just me.
I definitely understand what you're saying, especially with the fact politics is becoming too overcomplicated. I believe it is. I've been struggling to keep up with this election, and it's literally part of my studies to keep up with it. I've been struggling to watch everything, but I also think it's making it harder to look back on what's happened in the past. Like, so busy trying to keep up with what's going on that you can't look back and think, oh, maybe this is similar to something that happened in a Tony Blair election or a Margaret Thatcher election, which could be really important to look back on. So, for example, have you seen some of the Keir Starmer posters? I mean, I kind of stole it for the in-school election, but the one where it's like our key promises, our key steps for change, or something like that.
Yeah,
If
I have
you,
seen them. I've seen them also on the local Labour candidate, the one that's from Leicester, I think. I've seen it on the back of her poster. Like the whole, I think it's 6 or 7 steps.
yeah,
Yeah, I've seen
well,
those.
yeah, when you look at that poster, I think you might notice it's quite similar to a Tony Blair poster back from '97 when he was campaigning. Britain deserves better. Britain deserves change. This time around is about the change. Last time was about Britain being better. So it's yeah.
Yeah, I understand what you mean. It does kind of represent how campaigning evolves depending on current events. Current events has huge influence, I think, on all sorts, really, the Prime Minister's power as well, as we were looking at in lesson.
Yeah.
So
I just
yeah,
think it's it's interesting to look at sort of this is sort of the new Labour, if you think, being sort of subtle by sort of using similar posters, trying to tell maybe the older voters that this is the next 1997, which I presume was good.
yeah, 1997 it's hard for us to comprehend because we weren't there. But I've asked people about it, like my own parents, and it really was like some people really felt optimistic about the future because they'd experienced Margaret Thatcher, mass deindustrialization, cities reduced to boarded up houses, 15% unemployment, crime rate and waiting lists through the roof, housing crisis beginning to emerge, Black Wednesday, they'd lived through OPEC. It was just an absolute disaster. And seeing what the Labour Party was, because they hadn't seen the Labour Party in 20 years. Now, this is like an argument against the idea that the Dems are just always going to be the party that's mistrusted. And it does show that it can change. Because if you look at what, now I'm not saying it was James Callaghan's fault, because he inherited a problem and he didn't help it for sure, but he also, it was difficult to deal with. And that kind of stained the Labour Party, that they were kind of useless and ineffective, weak. And Tony Blair brought about this mass party unity, this rush of I'm different, I'm younger, I'm smart, I'm not going to do this, I'm doing this. This is completely different to what we did years ago. I'm going to accept some privatization. I'm going to do this and that. And it really did work. Now, in a time of crisis, change does emerge. It happens. It's just how human nature is with politics, I think. But yeah, I see what you mean. I feel as though what the posters have done have tried to kind of stem the, because I feel like the posters that you get in the mail, no, sorry, posters around town and the letters you get in the mail, leaflets, having that kind of 1997 Tony Blair is, I feel like as though they're trying to appeal to the sort of 30, 40-year-old demographic that grew up with that Tony Blair era, which is excitement, change, because it really was a period of change, wasn't it? Civil rights, were shooting through the roof under Tony Blair, and I feel as though he's, well, the Labour Party are trying to shore up their support within that demographic of 30, 40-year-olds. But yeah, I don't know about you.
I definitely agree. It sort of links to modern day with that Labour Party being stained before Tony Blair came in, because that's what's happening with the Conservatives now. All this Brexit, Partygate stuff has stained them. What I think is interesting is when I'm on the doorstep talking to people, and some people tell me quite politely, I'll add, they tell me that all the parties are the same, so they don't really know who they're going to vote for. But I feel like they don't really understand how comparative to back to before maybe 80s time, how different, no, 70s time, sorry, how different they've truly become, because before Thatcher it was mostly one nation Conservatives, where they too wanted to look after the working class, albeit for different reasons. So but back then maybe transitions between Conservative and Labour might not have been as noticeable. But now, when you look at austerity and welfare cuts, and yeah, it's just they are quite different when you look compared to back then, and it all came from Thatcherism and stuff. Although I suppose the argument for them not being different now is is how Tony Blair abolished Clause 4 of nationalism, not nationalism, nationalisation of all industries. But even then, Labour are now committed to renationalising the railways. So I just think it's interesting with that sort of
It, it,
conception.
it really is an elastic band. I'm starting to finally see what our teacher meant with the whole elastic band theory of what, just in general, what politics is. It really is. You've got to the point where if when the elastic band's at its weakest, their parties are at their bare form, nationalisation, change this, change that. And then you've got it stretched out. The parties are stretched out under crises and or whatever else it might be. And you've got kind of like they change everything. You've got maybe nationalise the stuff at the centre, and then it gets the wider elastic band when it's stretched out, and then it's time of crisis pressure, and then they abandon that. It goes, then the pressure is released. Housing crisis wears off a little bit, or economic conditions improve, or this and this and that. Then it releases again. Tension goes back to the centre. They become their core parties, and it does show you kind of like the evolution of politics, really. And that I can understand as well why some people fear things like, for example, like nationalisation. Because Keir Starmer doesn't say much. He hasn't said much about his manifesto, so obviously he's playing the defensive. He's got all to lose. Conservatives got all to gain, and other parties as well. And he's kind of people. Some people are quite paranoid about to what extent he's going to nationalise, depending on his own ideology. And that kind of sets the whole idea, a whole new argument about whether the Prime Minister has too much power within his own party, what he can do, depending on his own ideology. And I feel as though the changes around that, and some people have the right to be anxious, really, don't they, over the nationalisation of everything. Agree with it. But yeah, I see what you mean. Parties really do weave in and out of their roots as well as their fully bloomed leaves, I suppose, if using a plant analogy. Yeah, um, I need to go soon.
Fair enough. Well, we've talked about Reform, Lib Dems. We've mentioned Conservatives and Labour. So I suppose the last thing to talk about really is the Greens, or maybe if you want to talk about Plaid Cymru or the SNP.
The SNP I feel are the most interesting going into this next election. So obviously we're not Scottish. I struggle with this one. I need to share my controller batteries at some point, but I might cut out. You'll know why. So, yeah, the SNP. I'll give you a bit of background because I've been following this. They've had a set of I want to say like small scale scandals, more of kind of just issues within the party and outside of the party. Started all with things like the ferries. Towards the end of lockdown, they were investing in ferries, but I think there were like ties to the company, and it was like an issue because none of the ferries had actually been used. So investing money into nothing or something like that. They're not very popular. That was Nicola Sturgeon days. And then there was a transgender bill, massively unpopular within some of the Scottish National Party members and the support, the electorate. That harnessed it, and then she stood down. And then there was party finance scandal, not to mention that her husband got arrested, she got arrested, or taken into police questioning. And then before that, there was also a maybe £1.5 billion black hole or something like that, which is bad. And then there was the iPad scandal where someone had spent like £10,000 in Spain on data, or Morocco or something like that. Lots of scandals. And really, I think in terms of percentage of seats to lose, the Scottish National Party are probably at the minute, according to polling, the most at risk of negative percentage seat loss at the next general election in Westminster. Anyway, it's definitely a worry. But yeah, that's just me. So yeah.
Yeah, well, I haven't really been able to follow the Scottish or Welsh parties that closely, but
We can have a look at the
it is
SNP next
interesting.
week, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, unless there's anything else you want to talk about, I say we wrap it up here.
Well, it's been good.
Yeah. So thank you all for listening to Making It Political, our debut episode.
Making it political, our debut episode. That's a lot. But yeah.
More to come.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you all for listening.